Have you ever wondered what it would be like to have everything you could ever want? Wealth beyond measure, unparalleled wisdom, and a kingdom that stretched as far as the eye could see. This isn't just a fantasy. It's the true story of one of the Bible's most fascinating figures, King Solomon. Welcome, friends, to a journey through time, where we'll unravel the enigma of a man whose name has echoed through millennia. Solomon, a name synonymous with wisdom, but a life filled with paradoxes. How could someone so wise make such profound mistakes? How could a man blessed by God ultimately fall from grace? In the pages of history, few figures stand as tall or as complex as Solomon, the third king of Israel. His reign marked the golden age of the Hebrew monarchy, a time of unprecedented peace and prosperity. Yet beneath the glitter of gold and the sheen of success lay a tale of human frailty and divine grace. As we delve into Solomon's story, we'll explore not just the facts, but the heart behind them. We'll see how God can use even flawed individuals for his grand purposes. And perhaps in the process we might just find a bit of Solomon in ourselves. So are you ready to meet the man behind the legends? To understand the true Solomon beyond the myths? Buckle up, because this isn't just a history lesson. It's a journey that might just change how you see wisdom, wealth, and the ways of God. Our story begins not with Solomon, but with his father, the legendary King David. Picture this: a kingdom unified, enemies defeated, and God's favor resting upon Israel. But even in this golden era, dark clouds were gathering. Solomon was born into royal privilege, the son of David and Bathsheba. Yes, that Bathsheba, the woman whose story began with scandal but ended in redemption. God had a plan for this child, declaring even before his birth that he would be a man of peace. In Hebrew, Solomon means peace, a name that would shape his destiny. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Solomon's path to the throne was far from smooth. As the 10th son of David, he wasn't the obvious heir. His older brother Adonijah thought the crown was his for the taking. Can you imagine the tension in the palace? The whispers, the plots, the uncertainty. It took a dramatic intervention to secure Solomon's future. As David lay on his deathbed, the prophet Nathan and Bathsheba reminded him of his promise to make Solomon king. In a move that echoes through history, David declared Solomon his successor, anointing him before all Israel. Picture the scene: a young Solomon, perhaps overwhelmed, suddenly thrust into leadership of a powerful nation. The Bible tells us in 1 Kings 2:12, "So Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his rule was firmly established." But with great power comes great responsibility. Solomon faced immediate challenges. His father's last words included a chilling to-do list: deal with old enemies, reward loyal friends, and above all, follow God's ways. It was a baptism by fire for the new king. Solomon's rise to the throne teaches us a powerful lesson. God's plans often unfold in unexpected ways. He can take a child born of a troubled union and elevate him to greatness. It's a reminder that our past doesn't dictate our future when God is involved. As we leave Solomon at the start of his reign, full of promise and potential, we can't help but wonder, how will this young king handle the immense responsibility placed upon his shoulders? What will he do with the legacy his father left him? Imagine being offered anything in the world by God himself. What would you ask for? Wealth, long life, the defeat of your enemies? This was the incredible choice facing young King Solomon. In a dream that would change the course of history, God appeared to Solomon at Gibeon. The Lord said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." 1 Kings 3:5. It was a divine blank check, a test of character that would reveal the heart of Israel's new king. Solomon's response: it wasn't what you might expect from a young man suddenly thrust into power. Instead of personal gain, he asked for wisdom to govern God's people. His exact words were, "Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong." 1 Kings 3-9. This request pleased God so much that he gave Solomon not only unparalleled wisdom, but also what he didn't ask for: wealth, honor, and long life. It was a divine outpouring that would shape Solomon's reign and legacy. But what does this legendary wisdom look like in action? The Bible gives us a glimpse with the famous story of two women claiming the same baby. Solomon's solution: offer to cut the child in half. It sounds brutal, but it revealed the true mother's love and the impostor's indifference. This judgment amazed the people, showing that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice. 1 Kings 3:28. Solomon's wisdom wasn't just for solving disputes. It encompassed knowledge of the natural world, from plants to animals. He composed 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. His insights into human nature and godly living are preserved for us in the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. But here's the thing about wisdom. It's not just about knowing facts, it's about applying knowledge rightly. Solomon's gift of wisdom was meant to be used in service to God and his people. It was a tool, not an end in itself. This gift of wisdom challenges us today. Are we seeking wisdom to serve ourselves or to serve God and others? Are we using our knowledge and discernment to make a positive difference in the world? As we see Solomon step into his role as the wisest man who ever lived, we can't help but wonder, how will this extraordinary gift shape his reign? And more importantly, how will he use it? Picture a kingdom at the height of its power, a land flowing with milk and honey, where silver was as common as stones. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was Israel under Solomon's rule. Solomon's reign ushered in an era of unprecedented prosperity and peace. The Bible tells us in 1 Kings 4:25, during Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel from Dan to Beersheba lived in safety, everyone under their own vine and under their own fig tree. Can you imagine such widespread peace and abundance? But this prosperity didn't happen by accident. Solomon was a master administrator and visionary leader. He divided the kingdom into 12 districts, each responsible for providing for the royal household for 1 month of the year. This system ensured a steady flow of resources and distributed the burden evenly across the nation. Trade flourished under Solomon's rule. He established key alliances, including a partnership with Hiram, king of Tyre, which brought valuable cedar and cypress logs for his building projects. Solomon's fleet of trading ships brought exotic goods from far-off lands, filling the royal coffers with gold, silver, and precious stones. The scale of Solomon's wealth was staggering. 1 Kings 10:14 reports that the weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents, which in today's terms would be worth billions of dollars. His throne was made of ivory, overlaid with pure gold. Even his drinking cups were made of gold. Silver. It was considered of little value in Solomon's days. But Solomon's prosperity wasn't just about material wealth. It was a time of cultural and intellectual flourishing too. The arts thrived, with music and literature reaching new heights. People came from all over the known world to hear Solomon's wisdom, bringing tribute and adding to Israel's cosmopolitan atmosphere. However, with great prosperity comes great responsibility. Solomon's lavish lifestyle and massive building projects required an enormous workforce. He instituted a labor force of 30,000 men from all Israel, sending them to Lebanon in shifts to work on his various projects. As we survey the dazzling splendor of Solomon's kingdom, we might feel a mix of awe and unease. Yes, it was a golden age for Israel, a fulfillment of God's promises to bless his people. But was all this opulence in line with God's vision for his people? Was Solomon using his resources wisely, or was he getting carried away? Solomon's prosperous reign shows us the potential for blessing when we follow God's wisdom. But it also raises questions about the dangers of excess and the responsibilities that come with abundance. As we continue our journey through Solomon's life, we're left wondering, how will this unprecedented prosperity affect Solomon's heart? Will he remain faithful to the God who blessed him so abundantly? Imagine a building so magnificent, so awe-inspiring, that it would become the centerpiece of a nation's faith for centuries to come. This was Solomon's crowning achievement, the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. The temple wasn't just another building project. It was the fulfillment of a dream that had begun with Solomon's father David. As we read in 1 Kings 5:5, Solomon declared, "I intend, therefore, to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord told my father David." The scale of this undertaking was immense. Solomon enlisted 30,000 men from Israel, 70,000 carriers, and 80,000 stonecutters to work in the mountains. The supervision of this massive workforce required 3,300 foremen. Can you picture the bustling activity, the sound of hammers and chisels echoing across Jerusalem? But it wasn't just about manpower. The materials used were of the highest quality. Cedar from Lebanon, stones cut to size, gold, silver, and bronze. No expense was spared. The interior was paneled with cedar and overlaid with pure gold. Even the floor was covered with gold. The details of the temple's construction are meticulously recorded in Scripture, highlighting its significance. The Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant would rest, was a perfect cube, measuring 20 cubits in each direction. This precision wasn't coincidental. It reflected the perfection and holiness of God. Perhaps most striking were the two bronze pillars at the entrance named Jachin and Boaz. These weren't just architectural features, they were symbolic reminders of God's strength and stability. The construction took 7 years to complete. Imagine the anticipation as the temple neared completion. When it was finished, Solomon organized a grand dedication ceremony. The Ark of the Covenant was brought in, sacrifices were made, and Solomon offered a powerful prayer of dedication. And something extraordinary happened. As we read in 1 Kings 8:10-11, when the priests withdrew from the holy place, the cloud filled the temple of the Lord, and the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled his temple. God's presence filled the temple, a divine seal of approval on Solomon's work. It was a moment of supreme spiritual significance for Israel, marking a new era in their relationship with God. The temple stood as a testament to Solomon's devotion, but also to the skills and resources God had blessed him with. It was a place where heaven and earth met, where God's presence dwelt among his people. But as we marvel at this architectural and spiritual wonder, we might ask ourselves, is God more pleased with grand buildings or with humble, obedient hearts? How do we balance outward expressions of faith with inward devotion? As the temple stood gleaming in the Jerusalem sun, a symbol of Israel's faith and prosperity, little did they know the challenges that lay ahead. How would this magnificent structure shape Israel's future? And how would Solomon's own relationship with God evolve in the wake of this monumental achievement? Picture a kingdom so wealthy, so renowned, that rulers from across the known world clamored for an audience with its king. This was Israel under Solomon, a nation that had become a beacon of prosperity and wisdom in the ancient world. Solomon's fame spread far beyond Israel's borders. The Bible tells us in 1 Kings 4:34, "From all nations, people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom." Can you imagine the streets of Jerusalem buzzing with visitors from distant lands, all eager to catch a glimpse of this legendary king? Perhaps the most famous of these visitors was the Queen of Sheba. She came with a vast retinue, bearing spices, gold, and precious stones. Her mission? To test Solomon with hard questions. But Solomon's wisdom left her breathless, as she declared, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes." 1 Kings 10:6-7. Solomon's wealth was staggering. The Bible provides some mind-boggling figures. His yearly income of gold was 666 talents, that's about 25 tons. Silver was considered of little value in his days. His drinking cups were made of gold, and he had a magnificent throne of ivory overlaid with gold. But it wasn't just about accumulating wealth. Solomon was a shrewd trader and diplomat. He formed alliances with neighboring kingdoms, most notably with Hiram of Tyre. These partnerships opened up trade routes, bringing exotic goods to Israel. Solomon's fleet of trading ships would return every 3 years, laden with gold, silver, ivory, apes and peacocks. Solomon's building projects were equally impressive. Besides the temple, he constructed a palace complex that took 13 years to complete. He fortified cities, built storage cities, and even constructed Lebanon's Forest House, a summer retreat. His military might was formidable too. The Bible mentions that he had 4,000 stalls for chariot horses and 12,000 horses. In an age where cavalry was the pinnacle of military technology, this was a clear statement of Israel's power. Yet with all this wealth and fame came danger. As Solomon's reputation grew, so did the temptation to rely on his own strength rather than on God. The influx of foreign visitors brought not just trade goods, but also foreign customs and beliefs. Solomon's international fame raises some challenging questions for us today. How do we handle success and recognition? Do we use our resources and influence to glorify God, or do we become enamored with our own achievements? As we see Solomon at the height of his power and fame, we can't help but wonder, will he remain faithful to the God who blessed him so abundantly? Or will the allure of wealth and international acclaim lead him astray? In the glittering courts of Jerusalem, as foreign dignitaries paid homage and trade ships unloaded their exotic cargoes, the stage was set for both triumph and tragedy. How would Solomon navigate the challenges that came with such unprecedented success? As we turn this page in Solomon's story, we find ourselves in a world of luxury, diplomacy, and danger. Solomon's reign had brought Israel to new heights of prosperity and influence, but with these came new temptations and challenges. Solomon was a master of international relations. His marriages weren't just matters of the heart, they were political alliances. The Bible tells us in 1 Kings 11:3 that he had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. Can you imagine the complexity of managing such a household? His most famous marriage was to the daughter of Pharaoh, sealing an alliance with Egypt. This was unprecedented. For the first time, an Israelite king was considered an equal to the mighty Pharaoh. But this marriage came with a price. Solomon built a palace for his Egyptian wife, bringing foreign cultural influences right into the heart of Jerusalem. These marriages opened doors for trade and diplomacy, but they also opened Israel to foreign religious practices. Solomon's wives turned his heart after other gods. 1 Kings 11:4. The king who had built the temple to the one true God now allowed high places to be built for Chemosh, Molech, and other foreign deities. It's a startling turn of events. How could the wisest man in history make such a grave error? Perhaps it was a gradual process. One compromise led to another, until Solomon found himself far from the path God had set for him. The influence of these foreign customs wasn't just religious. It affected the entire culture of Israel. The simple agrarian lifestyle gave way to a more cosmopolitan, luxurious way of life. The court of Solomon became a melting pot of cultures, languages, and ideas. On one hand, this cultural exchange brought benefits. Israel was exposed to new technologies, arts, and knowledge from across the known world. Solomon's wisdom was enriched by insights from many cultures, but it also posed a threat to Israel's unique identity as God's chosen people. Solomon's foreign relationships present us with a complex picture. They showcase his diplomatic skills and Israel's growing influence. But they also reveal the dangers of compromise and the subtle ways our hearts can be led astray. This chapter of Solomon's life raises some challenging questions for us today. How do we engage with the world around us without losing our distinct identity? How can we appreciate diversity while remaining true to our core beliefs? As we watch Solomon navigate these treacherous waters of international politics and cultural exchange, we're left wondering, will he be able to maintain his devotion to God amidst all these foreign influences? And what will be the long-term consequences of these relationships for Israel? In the grand palaces of Jerusalem, as foreign princesses brought their customs and beliefs, the seeds of future conflict were being sown. How would this play out in the remaining years of Solomon's reign and in the generations to come? As we turn to this somber chapter in Solomon's life, we find a stark contrast to the glittering success of his earlier years. The wisest man in history was about to face the consequences of his unwise choices. The Bible doesn't mince words about Solomon's fall. 1 Kings 11:4 tells us, "As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been." It's a chilling statement, isn't it? The man who had built the temple and written profound words about wisdom had now turned away from the source of that wisdom. Solomon's decline wasn't sudden, it was a gradual erosion. His foreign wives brought their gods with them. And Solomon, perhaps in the name of diplomacy or personal desire, allowed the worship of these deities. He built high places for Chemosh, Moloch, and other false gods. The king, who once stood as a beacon of faithfulness to God, now cast a shadow of compromise. But God wasn't silent. He appeared to Solomon twice, warning him about the consequences of turning away. Yet Solomon didn't heed these warnings. It's a sobering reminder that even the wisest among us can fall if we don't remain vigilant. The consequences of Solomon's actions were severe and far-reaching. God declared that he would tear the kingdom away from Solomon, leaving only one tribe for his son, for the sake of David's legacy. The seeds of Israel's future division were sown in Solomon's reign. External threats began to arise. Hadad the Edomite and Rezon of Syria became adversaries to Solomon. The peace that had characterized much of his reign began to crumble. Even internally, trouble was brewing. Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials, was prophesied to rule over 10 tribes of Israel after Solomon's death. Perhaps most tragically, Solomon's spiritual legacy was tarnished. The king who had started his reign by asking God for wisdom ended it by leading his people into idolatry. The temple, once the crowning achievement of his devotion to God, now stood in a city dotted with shrines to foreign gods. Solomon's decline raises profound questions for us. How can someone so blessed, so wise, fall so far? It reminds us of the constant need for vigilance in our spiritual lives. No matter how much we know or how much we've achieved, we're always vulnerable to temptation and compromise. As we reflect on Solomon's fall, we might ask ourselves, where are the areas in our lives where we've allowed compromise to creep in? How can we guard our hearts against the subtle influences that can lead us away from God? The story of Solomon's decline is a cautionary tale. It shows us that wisdom without obedience is futile, that God's blessings require faithful stewardship, and that our actions have consequences not just for ourselves, but for generations to come. As the sun began to set on Solomon's reign, the golden age of Israel was drawing to a close. The kingdom that had reached such heights was poised on the brink of division. What would be the final legacy of this complex king? And what lessons can we draw from his life of triumph and tragedy? As we come to the end of Solomon's story, we're left with a complex legacy that echoes through history and speaks to us even today. How do we sum up a life of such dramatic highs and lows? What can we learn from this wisest of kings who ultimately lost his way? Solomon's legacy is a study in contrasts. On one hand, we have the magnificent temple, a wonder of the ancient world that stood as a testament to God's presence among his people for centuries. We have the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, which continue to offer profound insights into life, love, and the fear of the Lord. On the other hand, we have the divided kingdom that emerged after Solomon's death, a direct result of his disobedience. The golden age of Israel gave way to centuries of conflict and eventual exile. It's a sobering reminder that our actions can have consequences long after we're gone. But perhaps Solomon's greatest legacy is the lessons we can draw from his life. Here are a few to consider. Wisdom must be coupled with obedience. Solomon had unparalleled wisdom, but knowledge alone wasn't enough. As James 1:22 reminds us, we must be doers of the word and not hearers only. Success can be a double-edged sword. Solomon's prosperity brought great benefits, but also great temptations. How we handle success is often a greater test of character than how we handle adversity. Our choices affect others. Solomon's decisions impacted not just his own life, but the entire nation of Israel and future generations. We should always consider the wider implications of our actions. God's grace persists despite our failings. Despite Solomon's fall, God didn't completely abandon his promises. To David's line, this offers hope for all of us when we stumble. The heart is central. Solomon's outward accomplishments were impressive, but in the end, it was the state of his heart that mattered most to God. As Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Perhaps the most poignant lesson comes from Solomon himself in the book of Ecclesiastes. After experiencing all that life had to offer, he concluded, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." Ecclesiastes 12:13. As we reflect on Solomon's life, we might ask ourselves, how are we using the gifts and opportunities God has given us? Are we remaining faithful in times of blessing as well as times of trial? Are we leaving a legacy that points others toward God? Solomon's story is ultimately one of human potential and human frailty. It shows us the heights we can reach when we walk with God, and the depths to which we can fall when we turn away. But it also reminds us of God's enduring faithfulness, even when we are faithless. In the end, Solomon's life invites us to examine our own. Will we learn from his triumphs and his mistakes? Will we, unlike Solomon, finish well in our walk with God? As the curtain falls on the life of this extraordinary king, we're left with a challenge: to pursue wisdom, yes, but more importantly, to pursue a heart fully devoted to God. For in that lies true success, lasting impact, and a legacy that honors the one who gives us everything.